For nearly 3 decades, one of the darkest mysteries in American true crime history remained shrouded in silence. The brutal, unsolved case of JonBenet Ramsey, the 6-year-old beauty queen found lifeless in the basement of her family's Colorado mansion, left behind more questions than answers. And in the center of that silence stood a name that the public never forgot: Burke Ramsey, her older brother. The one person who was there in the house that night, yet barely said a word publicly for almost 30 years. Until now. After 28 years of speculation, documentaries, media pressure, and relentless internet theories, Burke has finally broken the silence. And what he said has sent shockwaves across the country. This wasn't just a casual statement or a PR move interview. It was a raw, emotional reckoning from someone who has carried the weight of one of America's most notorious cold cases on his back since he was just 9 years old. A boy turned man under the shadow of suspicion. A brother who lost his sister, but was treated like a suspect. Now, after decades of silence, he's finally speaking, and the truth he revealed is more disturbing, more heartbreaking, and more revealing than anyone could have expected. But what exactly did Burke say? Why now? And how does his testimony change everything we thought we knew about that chilling night in 1996? This is the moment the world has been waiting for, and the answers may shake you more than the crime itself. Because once you hear what Burke revealed, you can't unhear it. To outsiders, the Ramsey family looked like a picture-perfect slice of the American dream. John was a wealthy tech executive running a multi-million-dollar company, and Patsy was a former beauty queen who still carried herself with pageant poise. Their home in Boulder, Colorado, was massive, the kind of house people drive by and imagine what it must be like to live in. Inside, it seemed like everything was in place. 2 loving parents, a bright and energetic daughter with a crown already collecting pageant trophies, and a quiet older brother who stayed mostly out of the spotlight. On the surface, it was the kind of life people envied, but that carefully polished image would soon crack in the most horrific way imaginable. Because behind the family photos and smiling pageant snapshots, something was brewing that no one saw coming. JonBenet was adored by her parents, especially her mother, who poured herself into crafting her daughter's public persona, hair done just right, dresses sparkling, cameras flashing. The little girl who lit up stages was also just a kindergartner, playful, bubbly, and innocent. She wasn't a celebrity, she was a child. And then there was Burke, quiet, introverted, often described as shy. He was 3 years older than JonBenet, and while his sister was taking the stage, he was more comfortable in the background. Not many people paid attention to him, until everything changed. Because when JonBenet's life was stolen on Christmas night, it wasn't just her name that made headlines, it was her family's. And the silence surrounding her brother would become one of the most unsettling parts of the story. But what happened next would take this tragedy from a heartbreaking loss to a national obsession. It was the day after Christmas, December 26, 1996, when Patsy Ramsey woke up early and made a discovery that would turn her world inside out. There, on the back staircase of their home, was a handwritten ransom note, 3 pages long. It wasn't just strange, it was chilling. The note demanded exactly $118,000 for JonBenet's safe return, an oddly specific amount that just so happened to match the exact total of John Ramsey's year-end bonus from his company. It didn't take long before panic set in. JonBenet was missing. Patsy called the police immediately, believing her daughter had been kidnapped. But what came next still baffles investigators and true crime experts to this day. Instead of launching a full-scale search or treating the entire house as a crime scene, law enforcement treated it like a kidnapping and failed to lock things down. Friends and family were allowed to enter and roam the house freely. Evidence was touched, moved, maybe even destroyed, before anyone realized the full horror of what had really happened. Because just hours later, it wasn't law enforcement who found JonBenet, it was her father. John Ramsey discovered her lifeless body in the basement of their home, hidden behind a door in a rarely used room. She had been brutally assaulted. Her skull was fractured. She had been strangled with a garrote made from a broken paintbrush, later identified as one that belonged to her mother. And yet, the ransom note was still sitting there, as if any of this was ever about money. It was clear this wasn't a kidnapping gone wrong. It was something much darker, much more personal. The case had just exploded into a full-blown mystery, and the clues were already leading somewhere terrifying. But it wasn't just the crime that raised questions, it was how the investigation began to fall apart from the very start. From the very first moments, investigators made mistakes that would haunt the case for decades. Instead of locking down the entire house as a crime scene, police focused only on JonBenet's bedroom. The rest of the home? Left open. Friends wandered through, officers came and went, and family members moved freely, contaminating evidence without even realizing it. And then came the biggest mistake of all. John Ramsey, upon finding his daughter's body, picked her up and carried her upstairs. In his panic, he unknowingly destroyed crucial forensic clues, any signs of how she had been positioned, whether anything around her was disturbed, or what kind of struggle might have taken place. Even the interviews with the parents were mishandled. Instead of separating John and Patsy to get independent statements, investigators allowed them to be questioned together. It was a decision that would later be criticized by law enforcement veterans and criminal psychologists alike. In a case this sensitive, where even the smallest inconsistency could break things open, the opportunity to catch those cracks was lost from day one. And then there was the ransom note. A bizarre, 2.5-page letter written on paper from inside the house. Analysts and profilers were baffled. No real kidnapper takes that kind of time. No real ransom note sounds like a movie script. It was overly dramatic, suspiciously detailed, and completely out of place. Many began to wonder, was it written to mislead? Was it part of the crime itself? As these errors piled up, public trust in the investigation collapsed. And through it all, the Ramsey family stayed in the spotlight. But one figure stayed strangely quiet. The 9-year-old boy in the shadows, whose silence only made people wonder more. And soon, the world would start asking, what about Burke? From the very beginning, Burke Ramsey was the quiet one. Just 9 years old at the time of his sister's death, he was quickly shielded from the media, barely seen in public, and rarely mentioned in press conferences. But as the case dragged on and suspicion swirled in every direction, people started to notice the silence, and question it. Why wasn't Burke talking? Why wasn't he crying on camera, or making statements like the rest of the family? And if he was in the house that night, what exactly did he see, or hear? As more details surfaced and the case began to take on a life of its own in tabloids, documentaries, and internet forums, Burke's name kept resurfacing. Not because of any hard evidence, there was none, but because of what people perceived as odd behavior. In later interviews, some found his demeanor strange, too calm, too detached. Others insisted it was just a traumatized child coping in his own way. Either way, the public couldn't let go of the mystery. Conspiracy theories exploded. Some accused Burke directly. Others claimed the family was covering for him. Theories were twisted, dissected, and broadcast around the world. And all the while, Burke stayed silent. No public defense. No personal interviews. Just a quiet presence in one of the loudest, most public cases in modern history. It wasn't just the tragedy that haunted people. It was the gaps, the unanswered questions. And with Burke offering no answers, people filled in the blanks themselves. Fair or not, his silence became the fuel that kept the fire burning. But years later, when science finally spoke louder than speculation, the case took a sharp turn in a completely different direction. 4 years, the Ramsey family lived under a cloud of suspicion. The media tore them apart, talk shows dissected every moment of their interviews, and internet sleuths painted damning theories with zero hesitation. But then came the twist no one saw coming. In 2003, investigators re-examined the forensic evidence using newly advanced DNA testing, technology far more precise than what existed in the 90s, and what they found shifted the entire narrative. DNA recovered from JonBenet's clothing didn't match John. It didn't match Patsy. And most importantly, it didn't match Burke. In fact, the genetic material didn't belong to anyone in the family. It came from an unidentified male, someone completely unknown, a stranger. This discovery was a bombshell. It didn't just raise doubts about the initial investigation, it blew the original theories wide open. The Boulder Police Department, which had once been accused of bias and incompetence, was now forced to backtrack. And in a stunning move, they publicly apologized to the Ramseys. Just like that, The family went from suspects to victims in the eyes of the law. But for the public, it wasn't so simple. After years of speculation, after books and documentaries pointed fingers in every direction, the idea that an unknown intruder was responsible felt unfinished. Too convenient, too vague. People wanted names, they wanted motives, and most of all, they wanted closure. Instead, all they got was a faceless DNA profile with no match and no answers. Still, for Burke, that DNA test was more than just a shift in evidence. It was a lifeline, a scientific wall between him and the rumors that had followed him his entire life. But silence only goes so far, and eventually, even Burke couldn't stay quiet forever. And when he finally spoke, everything changed again. After 28 years of mystery, Burke Ramsey finally broke the silence that had followed him like a shadow. No press release, no lawyer speaking on his behalf. Just Burke, older now, composed, and ready to speak for himself. The moment the interview dropped, it felt like the entire world hit pause. Because for the first time since that horrific night in 1996, we weren't hearing about Burke, we were hearing from him. And what he shared wasn't defensive. It was raw, personal. He opened up about what it was like growing up under a microscope, being called a suspect in his own sister's case, and watching the media turn his childhood trauma into tabloid entertainment. He described the fear, the isolation, the years of silence that weren't just about protecting his privacy, they were about surviving it all. Burke said he never truly had a childhood. His name became synonymous with tragedy. His every movement dissected, his every expression criticized. He explained how the grief of losing JonBenet collided with the suffocating weight of public suspicion. And even though DNA had cleared him years ago, the whispers never really stopped. But Burke didn't just talk about himself. He also pointed the spotlight back where it belonged, on the investigation. He called out the early mistakes made by police, the mishandling of evidence, the decision to let his parents speak to authorities together rather than separately. And he didn't shy away from the strange details, like the ransom note, admitting he was just as confused about it as the rest of the world. For decades, people wondered what Burke knew. Now, they finally had a glimpse. But this wasn't just a confession, it was a reckoning. And yet, even with his voice finally out there, the most shocking part was still to come. Burke's words didn't just fill in the blanks, they opened new ones. One of the most striking things he admitted was that, to this day, he still doesn't know who wrote the ransom note. He said it felt surreal, almost theatrical, and couldn't understand how something that elaborate could have been written inside their home without anyone noticing. It disturbed him, and it still does. But he didn't stop there. Burke addressed the decades of criticism aimed at his parents. He didn't claim they were perfect, but he made it clear they were grieving, traumatized, and overwhelmed. He spoke about the night JonBenet was found and how everything after that became a blur of police lights, media vans, and suspicion. He didn't try to justify the decisions his parents made. He just reminded the world that they were human. Two devastated people caught in the middle of every parent's worst nightmare, while also being accused of causing it. And then came the part that truly shook people. Burke's plea for justice. Not just for himself. For JonBenet. He said he wants every shred of evidence retested using today's technology. Every thread, every fiber, every overlooked clue. Because in his words, this isn't just about clearing a family name, it's about finding out who really did it. He said he's tired of silence, tired of the theories, tired of watching his sister's name become a spectacle instead of a cause. For the first time, it wasn't just a mystery being discussed on talk shows, it was a brother, publicly demanding answers for the sister he lost. But even as Burke's words echoed across the world, what followed next proved that this story was far from over. Burke's interview lit a firestorm. Within hours, true crime forums reignited. Comment sections filled with theories, debates, and emotional outpourings. Some viewers praised him for his courage, finally confronting a lifetime of rumors with honesty and pain etched into every word. Others weren't so quick to forgive or forget. The internet, after all, has a long memory and an even longer list of accusations. Legal analysts began dissecting Burke's statements line by line, while former investigators weighed in on whether his recollections might offer anything new. Some wondered aloud if his call for advanced DNA testing could finally push the case into modern investigative territory. technology that wasn't available in the late 90s but could now expose details no one imagined. And yet, the most powerful reactions weren't from experts. They came from regular people. People who had followed the case since the beginning, who remembered where they were when JonBenet's photo first flashed on the evening news. For them, hearing Burke speak wasn't just shocking, it was emotional. A long-awaited voice in a story that had always felt incomplete. For the Ramsey family, it was another wave of public attention, this time with Burke at the center. Not as a shadowy figure in someone else's narrative, but as a man telling his own. It didn't bring closure. It didn't reveal a smoking gun. But it did something else. It humanized a case that had long been swallowed by spectacle. And in the end, that humanity, those raw, haunted words from a grieving brother, might be what finally pushes this story into its next chapter. 28 years after one of the most haunting tragedies in American history, the case of JonBenet Ramsey remains unsolved. But now, for the first time, the silence that surrounded her brother has finally been broken. Burke Ramsey's voice doesn't come with dramatic revelations or shocking new evidence, but it changes the story in a different way. It brings it back to something that's often been lost: humanity. For decades, the case has been treated like a puzzle for the public to solve, picked apart by strangers, theorized over by talking heads, turned into documentaries and deep-dive Reddit threads. And while the world tried to fit the pieces together, Burke was left in the shadows, defined more by what he didn't say than by who he was. Now, his decision to speak out gives the world something it never truly had in this case: the raw emotion of a surviving sibling. Not a suspect, not a theory, a brother. Burke didn't offer all the answers, but he asked all the right questions. Why was the crime scene never properly secured? Why were his parents treated as suspects before the evidence even pointed anywhere? And most of all, why hasn't this case been reopened using the advanced forensic tools available today? What he's asking for isn't fame. It's not even forgiveness. It's resolution. It's closure, not just for his family, but for a little girl whose life was taken far too soon, and for a nation that has never forgotten her name. Burke's silence once fed suspicion. His words now demand action. Whether those words finally lead to justice, or more heartbreak, remains to be seen. But one thing is clear: the story isn't over. And maybe, just maybe, the truth is still out there.